So I think one of the reasons why some students and some people end up leaving school disliking poetry or being uninterested in poetry is because in schools often a lot of poetry focuses on dead white male poets and poems that we feel have no relevance to our own lives. And and the other reason is poetry analysis often is done in such a way that's kind of painful, like looking at rhyme and um, just the way that you're told to analyze a poem to death and just spit out its theme and things like that. So some of those approaches in schools can really make students hate poetry. And so I really want us to disrupt those ways, to show the diversity of poems, to show poets as living and diverse and speaking to themes and issues that are important to us. And when it comes to analyzing a poem, I want you to start not by trying to, decide, count the lines and the rhyming scheme and all of those things, but where does it, like, how does that poem feel for you? How does that poem engage you? How does it make you feel? Um, and what might you learn from that poem? So that's one thing to think about. The other big theme that we'll talk about, or a big issue that we'll talk about a lot in this course, is mentor texts. So a mentor text is simply a piece of writing or text. It might not just be text, it might be multimodal, but something that you can learn from. Something you, and in particular in terms of writing, something where you can learn the writer's craft, you can really see what a writer or a poet has done. So I just asked you to listen to that poem from Ruth Foreman, and she's a poet that I've discovered recently. And I'm just thinking in terms of a mentor text, what might I learn from that poem? And there's so much, right? But firstly, it deeply moved me, right? I found that poem deeply moving. Um, that's something I'd love to be able to do to my audience. Poetry doesn't come naturally to me. It's something I need to or continue to work on. I think some of it is you have to be really vulnerable to be a poet in many ways, especially if you're speaking to these really powerful issues. So one thing, just overall, the topic of that poem really hit home to me. Peace and how relevant it is. So maybe if I'm writing a poem, like how can I make my topic feel relevant and important, both to me, to the moment in time, to my audience. That's a big idea. A much simpler idea, but very powerful in her poem, is her use of repetition. And I think that's something that I can learn as a poet, like how she uses each at the beginning of many of those lines. And then when she switches it up as well, right? So you use repetition and then change it up too. I also notice, repeating that line, "May peace be called," was very powerful. So repetition is something. And then another thing that I thought was really powerful in her poem was contrast. So this topic is peace, right? But then with these images of peace, there's also some very graphic images of violence in her poem, which were deeply moving. So I remember one, black batons against a brown back, right? It's a really powerful image. So she's using that contrast. So there's just things, and I'd love you to think about that poem and what you might learn from it as a poet. And you are going to find that your next task is going to be to find your own new poet, a new poem, and to learn from them. So this week we're looking at mentor texts for poetry, and you'll see throughout this course that we'll look at mentor texts for many different genres and forms of writing, from writing for many different purposes. I'm just excited to see what you learn from your poet, and I'm excited to read your own poems too. Thank you.